Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and Facebook, and you can support me on Locals, Subscribe Star, and buy me a coffee. Now, I'm joined by Terminal Philosophy again. It's been a while. Glad to have you back, TP.
Hey, thanks a ton for having me back. It's been a long hiatus, but I've been looking forward to joining you again and talking warfare and politics and all the other trimmings that go along with it.
Awesome. So, one of the things that I remember when we were doing our History of Warfare series, the War Elephant video. Now, of course, that was more of a positive account of their deployment and use and so on. But I thought, there's actually a lot that's been written in the classical sources about effective techniques against them, which we only really maybe paid small lip service to due to the broader nature of that episode. And I thought, well, maybe we could get into that. So, but before that, let's just reset the stage for everybody who's concerned. Western forces, i.e., Greco-Roman, don't engage with elephants, confirmed until 326 BC at the Battle of Hydaspes. According to that, all the Greek historians admit that the Great Mutiny at Apus River was the result of the Macedonians not wanting to fight more elephants. Plutarch mentions this, Arrian mentions this, and Megisthenes, who's an Indo-Bactrian, mentions this. So that's pretty much conclusive. And Alexander began the use of employment of some elephants himself. Then they're used, the next major addition of elephants comes with Seleucus, when he signs a treaty with Chandragupta for, I think, 400 or 500 elephants, which is crazy. And he uses them effectively at the Battle of Ipsus, winning the Battle of the Diadochi against Antigonus and Demetrius. And then we have uses famously with Pyrrhus, the Carthaginians, and Hannibal. And we don't really see elephants used in a Western context after Thapsus in 46 BC by Optimate forces in North Africa. But we do see them used by the Persians all the way down to the Islamic conquest. Now, from a Western perspective, we don't see them used afterwards until the British arrive in India and are fighting, Indian armies directly, which is hundreds of years after the fact. And so for this duration, we're looking at a period from broadly 326 BC with Alexander at Hydaspes to sometime in the 4th century with some accounts. Actually, Vegetius, I think, is maybe closer to the 5th. But there's some accounts by Ammianus Marcellinus in the 4th century. And then we have accounts of anti-elephant tactics, which, of course, at the time Vegetius was writing, the Sassanian Empire was still using elephants. So right up to that time frame, so we're talking like 600-700 years. And so we'll just leave that as an opener for just refreshing everybody as to the use of elephants. Is there anything you want to add to that or comment on?
No, I would just say that in general, I believe that you're right, that as far as the first Western, Greco encounter with elephants was at the Battle of Hydaspes. And, there's been some speculation that it could have been earlier, but there was just no one around to document it. And there was no one around to take note of tactics and how it was used. Before the Greeks the Macedonians had arrived to northern India, many of the fortresses that already existed there between these different warring kingdoms, many of the gates of the fortresses actually had spikes facing outward, iron spikes, as a way to deter an invading force to use elephants as a battering ram, which had been used. That had been used in later conflicts in the Diadochi Wars and the Second Diadochi War, but those were already present by the time the Macedonians had arrived. But as far as this was really the first East meets West with regards to the use of elephants in warfare.
Now, according to all the sources, Alexander, of course, triumphed over the elephants at Hydaspes because of the elite training of his phalangites at this point. But that's not specifically an anti-elephant tactic. That's just elite troops overcoming a very difficult obstacle. The first main counter, and this is actually the most common counter to elephants, is the use of skirmishers, so archers, javelin men, slingers, in order to discomfort and anger the elephants. There's two historical accounts. One of the Roman Battle of Beneventum in The Life of Pyrrhus by Plutarch, where he says, let's see here, elephants. There we go, yeah. Manius, however, since the sacrifices were propitious and the crisis forced action upon him, led his forces out and attacked the foremost of the enemy, and after routing these, put the whole army to flight, so that many of them fell and some of their elephants were left behind and captured. Okay, and this is... here we go, yeah. And then he says, this victory brought Manius down into the plain to give battle. Hereafter, an engagement in open ground, he routed the enemy at some points, but was at once overwhelmed by the elephants and driven back upon its camp, where he was obliged to call out the guards who were standing on the parapet in great numbers, all in arms, full of fresh vigor. Down they came from their strong places, and hurling their javelins at the elephants, compelled them to wheel about and run back through the ranks of their own men, thus causing disorder and confusion there. Now, we also see that similar tactics are used by Julius Caesar in his account of the African War. We read here in here. Caesar, perceiving that the ardor of his troops would admit of no restraint, giving good fortune for the word, spurred on his horse and charged the enemy's front. On the right wing, the archers and slingers poured their eager javelins without intermission upon the elephants, and by the noise of their slings and stones, so terrified these animals that they turned upon their own men. They trod them down in heaps and rushed through the half-finished gates of the enemy. At the same time, the Mauritanian horse, who were in the same wing with the elephants, seeing themselves deprived of their assistance, but took themselves to flight, whereupon the legions wheeling round the elephants soon possessed themselves of the enemy's entrenchments, and some few that made great resistance being slain, the rest fled with all expedition to the camp they had quitted the day before. So we see that this is the easiest because it really doesn't take a whole lot of preparation. You just have to have the right troops that are trained. Now, again, in the first case at Beneventum, the Romans did have a fortified camp, but that's just how the Romans, fought their campaigns. And the reason why is that the elephants, especially if you went for like the softer parts, like their eyes or their trunk, you could really madden them, and that was the best way to get them to turn against their own forces. And of course, because you're light troops, it's easier to get out of the way of elephants. So this is the most common, and you'll see this in other examples, but I think those two were the most illustrative.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. As far as I can tell, is taking a larger retrospective look at what the preferred tactics were for deterring elephant formations and their initiative was ranged weapons were the preferred methods for doing that. Now, in addition to arrows, Macedonians also had, rock slingers and formations like that. But the point was to keep them at a distance to try and madden them or make them, as they say, run amok, because it goes without saying that elephants are not horses and elephants are not dogs. And while elephants can be trained, in sort of a limited sort of way, and they're actually fairly intelligent animals. It's just that in a combat setting, it's not too difficult to make them sort of lose their minds and freak out and stampede. And it could be in any direction. It could even be in the direction that the forces that control them want them to go. But and I think, as we'll probably discuss later on, for one of the reasons why while they were phased out, apart from the North African elephants' extinction, they were just too unruly and too logistically challenging to maintain for any standing army. And so I would say that ranged weapons were probably the most preferred method to keep them at a distance. And then second were probably obstacles. And third, I think we'll probably get to, is the use of fire. And we'll get later on, we'll address the use of pigs being lit on fire. Even the screaming of pigs sort of affects elephants psychologically in a really sort of interesting way. But yeah, no, I agree with what you said.
So another example of counter-elephant tactics is again found in the Life of Pyrrhus, this time in his siege of Sparta, where we read how the Spartans prepared their defense specifically to meet his elephants. Next, it was decided to run a trench parallel with the camp of the enemy, and at either end of it set their wagons, sinking them into the wheel hubs in the ground in order that thus firmly planted they might impede the advance of the elephants. Now, he doesn't say much more about the elephants in this battle, but elephants can't jump. So if you dig a trench wide enough, they can't cross it. And so I don't know if Plutarch means that this was a way to just negate the deployment of elephants entirely, or if they were going to engage with missile troops anyhow. It's not clearly stated, but regardless of what the intent was, such a entrenchment would effectively stop the use of elephants. We could also mention city combat, like in Argos, or where he invades Argos, Pyrrhus invades Argos, or when Perdiccas is trying to cross into Egypt and is defeated by Ptolemy. But those aren't really anti-elephant tactics. That's just extremely poor use of an elephant, which is just, it should be obvious you don't send elephants into cities. But the main thing is elephants can't jump, and so trenches are a good way to negate elephants.
Absolutely, and I think one other example that goes along with that is the Battle of Megalopolis in 317 BC, where the defenders had used sort of hidden and obscured boards with nails sticking through them that had just been dug in sort of shallow trenches along the roads inside the city. A lot of the times, the crewmen operating elephants, I think historically they're referred to as drivers, I believe, although I've heard them referred in other ways, but we'll just go with that for now. The drivers of the elephants were of Indian ethnicity, and sometimes there was a lot of, we've discussed this before, but a lot of linguistic distances, shall we say, just a lot of language barriers, and sometimes there was a lot of miscommunication between the command element and the guys controlling the elephant formations. And in the case of Megalopolis, they were just stormed right into the city, which is about as about as stupid of a thing as you can imagine, because you want them to engage formations in open ground where they can maximize their damage potential. And when you put them in an urban environment, they're going to constantly be harassed by missile fire. And then in the case of Megalopolis, the elephants were in so much pain they couldn't go forwards or backwards because they started stepping on these huge nails, and their pads on their feet are, they're just susceptible to being pierced. And so it created a huge problem for the forces besieging Megalopolis. So yeah, urban, and it didn't work in Sparta either. That was just it was a horrible mishap by Pyrrhus, and yeah, it did not work out at all.
To tie into your point about the siege of Megalopolis, the use of chained caltrops is described by Diodorus Siculus at the Battle of Gaza, where Ptolemy and Seleucus defeat Demetrius, and I quote, "They drew up on this wing the 3,000 strongest of their cavalry, along with whom they themselves had decided to fight. In front of this position, they placed the men who were to handle the spiked devices made of iron and connected by chains that they had prepared against the onset of the elephants, for when these contrivances had been stretched out, it was easy to prevent the beasts from moving forward." So a caltrop is a four-pointed iron device that is, no matter which way you throw it, it's going to be standing on three legs with one spike pointing up. And when it's all chained out, it's sort of like how on the road police have these things you can extend out, which puncture the tire tracks, the tire wheels of a car. It's sort of like that. And that goes, so you could have nails put in the floor as the elephants go in the gate, or you can have the nails come with you, and you could just put them in front of your forces. And the only way you'd have to remove, if these are heavy iron chains, you'd have to have men come out and remove them, which they'd be vulnerable to counterattack from missile troops or worse. And so that will be the other thing. Elephants' feet are very soft. You either go for the face or the feet.
No, you're absolutely right to reference the Battle of Gaza with the use of caltrops. And one other thing I think that's worthy of mentioning here, and this goes back to the Battle of Hydaspes, which is that I think because this was, as far as the best that we can guess or rely upon, with this being the first Western encounter in a combative setting with elephants, one of the main reasons they were the Punjabs were routed, or sometimes they're referred to as the Mahouts, but that's, sorry, that's neither here nor there, but it's really through the superiority of maneuvering and formation. One thing that the Macedonians did very well against the Persians was to allow open channels in their own formations for chariots to go right through some of these lines and then hit the chariots from the flanks. And I think there's enough evidence from Arrian and Xenophon to I think you could conclude, again, these are sources of antiquity, so there's going to be a never-ending debate on the authenticity or the truthfulness of that. But I think it's okay to rely upon it in the sort of military analytical sense that the Macedonians allowed for their formation to break up into smaller pieces to allow chariots or horsebound units or elephant units to break through, giving them sort of a false sense of momentum and victory. But then when you can start hitting elephants on the sides, and if you can get in close with ranged weapons, or you can get in close with some of these veteran soldiers that Alexander had under his command, then you can start to sort of break up these elephant units incrementally, rather than taking it on like head on, which is what an elephant unit would prefer.
Right. Now, we have what I was probably best called a complex combined arms answer, which is Scipio et Zama. So we have the accounts of Plutarch. So he says this is the development of the Battle of Zama, so pre-battle deployments. Scipio placed his men on the field in the following order: the hastati first, with intervals between their maniples; behind them the principes, their maniples not arranged to cover the intervals between those of the hastati, as the Roman custom is, which, FYI, that's the chessboard formation that everybody sees in the textbooks. But immediately behind them at some distance, because the enemy was so strong in elephants. In the rear of these, he stationed the triarii. And then he says, the intervals between the front maniples he filled with maniples or velites, who were ordered to begin the battle, but if they found themselves unable to stand the charge of the elephants, to retire quickly to the rear of the whole army by the intervals between the maniples, which went straight through the ranks, or if they got entangled with the elephants, to step aside into the literal spaces between the maniples. Then the actual conduct of the opening stages of the battle, all the arrangement for the battle being complete, and the two opposing forces of Numidian cavalry having been for some time engaged in skirmishing attacks upon each other, Hannibal gave the word to the men on the elephants to charge the enemy. But as they heard the horns and trumpets braying all around them, some of the elephants became unmanageable and rushed back upon the Numidian contingents of the Carthaginian army. And this enabled Massinissa with great speed to deprive the Carthaginian left wing of its cavalry support. The rest of the elephants charged the Roman velites in the spaces between the maniples of the line, and while inflicting much damage on the enemy, suffered severely themselves until becoming frightened. Some of them ran down the vacant spaces, the Romans letting them pass harmlessly along, according to Scipio's orders, while others ran away to the right under a shower of darts from the cavalry, until they were finally driven off the field. So Scipio has a complex strategy here. He has his men deployed in a unique formation where they are prearranged signals to make gaps in the line. The battle is to be initiated by the velites, so that's back to Beneventum and Thapsus. But then if they can't defeat the elephants in the initial onset, to fall into those gaps and through the showering of javelins sort of create this sort of like pain corridor where they just find the least resistance to get out. And then when they're surrounded, they can get dispatched. And of course, the initial onset of the elephants was disrupted by trumpets. So Scipio has found an extremely elaborate, complex, combined arms approach, which we don't really see with any other counter-elephant strategy, and probably one of the most successful.
Yeah, you're right about that. Absolutely. The Battle of Zama is, I guess, just a culmination of the use of several different tactics. I think one of the reasons why Scipio was victorious in that is because, first of all, I think because of Roman formation discipline, because the initial onslaught from the elephants, as far as we're aware from the history, was actually was inflicting a lot of pain on the Romans. But with the combination of trumpets and just, I think, a lot of just background ambient noise, elephants just are not psychologically suited for that. They want to, get the heck out of there. And at that point, the elephant unit sort of lost their cohesion and their ability to inflict damage. And so a lot of them became completely unruly. And then also with the Carthaginian left flank being deprived, or sorry, I think it was the Carthaginian right flank being deprived of the use of their cavalry. With the the Romans holding fast, being able to sustain some initial blows from the Hydaspes, or like the Hydaspes were the ones who were really taking the brunt of the casualties. The fact that the entire army's formation was just disciplined and willing to hold on and just to sort of chip away at the elephants while depriving Carthaginian cavalry. The elephant, you're just you're on a clock with elephants, really. They're reliable for only so long. And if they're put into a position where their momentum is stopped by a dense formation, whether it be Macedonian, Roman, or otherwise, they're going to lose their initiative, and the result of that is they're going to stampede or freak out, and they're going to head out in any direction, whatever directions seems the most appealing to them to get away from all this. And that has typically, the army that controls them typically, in many cases gets a taste of their own medicine when they get, even like 2 or 3 elephants stampeding through even a well-disciplined formation. It's going to completely disorganize everything. So, yeah, it wasn't just one tactic in particular that saved Scipio's forces. It was the use of, I guess you could say, sound or audio psychological warfare. There's probably a better way to put that, with the combination of Roman discipline and depriving Carthaginians of the use of one of their flanks. And I think, with a few other exceptions, I think that's a fair summary of Zama.
Right. Now, I know you wanted to talk about the little more exotic anti-elephant strategies, and the most famous one is the flaming pig. So Alien in book 16 of On the Nature of Animals. Oh, okay, looks like my computer's freezing up here. Let's try to find this again. Says this in paragraph 36. I have stated earlier that elephants dread a pig. I now wish to tell what happened at Megara when the Megarians were besieged by Antigonus. And the story I have to tell is follows. When the Macedonians were pressing them hard, they smeared some pigs with liquid pitch, set light to them, and let them loose against the enemy. Goaded with pain and shrieking because of their burns, the pigs fell upon the troops of the elephants, driving them mad and throwing them into terrible confusion. So the elephants broke ranks and were no longer tractable, in spite of having been trained since they were small, either because elephants by some instinct hate and loathe pigs, or because they dread the shrill and discordant sound of their voices. In consequence, those who are young train elephants, being aware of this, keep pigs along with them. So it is said, in order that through herding together the elephants may get to fear them less. And the other one is Polyaenus in his Stratagems, book 4, paragraph 3. At the siege of Megara, Antigonus brought his elephants into the attack, but the Megarians daubed some swine with pitch, set it fire, and loosed them among the elephants. The pigs grunted and shrieked under the torture of the fire, and sprang forwards as hard as they could among the elephants, who broke their ranks in confusion and fright, and ran off in directions from this time onwards. Antigonus ordered the Indians, when they were training up their elephants, to bring swine with them, so the elephants might be thus accustomed to the sight of them and to their noise. So there seems to be some dispute as to what about the pigs made the elephants afraid. Given the effect that the trumpets had at Zama, I'm going to go with the noise. I think it's the noise that did that. And of course, if the pigs are on fire, they're going to make some pretty nasty noises.
Yeah, there is something peculiar going on there, and I don't know if it's some feature of evolutionary development in an elephant or something like that, or it could be something entirely different. But there's something about the shrill shrieking of a pig that has come up historically several times, where it just it completely will destabilize an elephant unit. And I forget the name of the battle, and I've been looking for it. I came across it a few days ago. There was, I think it was either by an Arab commander or it could have been in one of the Diadochi wars, but the defending forces of a city that was being besieged that hung a pig or several pigs down by ropes and let them scream as they kind of like kicked their legs against the wall. And apparently that was enough to it didn't send the elephants running in the opposite direction into the countryside, but it completely disturbed them. And the Indian the mahouts were just unable to control them. And I forget the name of that battle. I think
wasn't it the siege of Nisibis?
Oh, I think you're right. I will verify that for you, but I think you're right on that one. But that even and granted, this is not even a group of pigs that's been set on fire and running in the direction of elephants. This is just the shrieking of pigs who are being held by ropes against a wall. So yeah, it was not a PETA era. It's not a PETA friendly era in history, but I can't believe that like even that. The simple act of hanging a pig down just by a rope around its stomach is that apparently. I mean, if the historical account can be relied upon, that really is. I mean, it's pretty funny, but it's also, I guess that just says a lot about what elephants are willing to tolerate. Because on the opposite side of that, there is an Arab commander, I think from. Forgive me, I don't know if it's from a particular like Zoroastrian power after the Xerxes dynasties, but there was an account of an elephant that came out of a victorious battle. It was the commander's elephant it had been pierced by over 100 arrows, but the animal was still mobile and it didn't appear to really hurt it. The only thing that the Indians developed, I think, later on, and I think there's a lot of debate whether this was before or after Alexander had shown up with the Macedonians had shown up, that they started making all iron arrows to pierce deeper into the hide of an elephant. And so, yeah, like wooden arrows with either wooden tips or steel tips like that, they can handle that all day. But the shrieking of pigs, it's like, what the heck, man? It's almost like a cheat code.
Okay, so I looked it up. It was the siege of Edessa. It's recorded by Procopius.
Okay, thank you. Yep, that is correct.
So that's probably the most exotic way to defeat an elephant. But then there's another one which is related to the first one, the application of missile fire, but it's more heavy duty and sustained. And in the campaigns against the Sassanians, Ammianus Marcellinus records the use of ballistae and catapults against the elephants. And he says, still the ballista of the enemy placed on their iron towers and pouring down missiles of great power from the high ground on those in a lower position spread a great deal of slaughter in our ranks. At last, when evening came on, both sides retired to rest, and a greater part of the night was spent by us in considering what device could be adopted to resist the formidable engines of the enemy. At length, after we had considered many plans, we determined on one which the rapidity with which it would be executed would made safest. To oppose 4 scorpions to the 4 ballistae, which would carefully move a very difficult operation from the place in which they were. But from this work was finished, day arrived, bringing us a mournful sight, inasmuch as it showed us formidable battalions of the elephants. Formidable battalions of Persians with their trains of elephants, the noise and size of which animals are such that nothing more terrible can be presented to the mind of a man. And when we were pressed on all sides with the vast masses of arms and works and beasts, still our scorpions were kept at work, with their iron slings hurling large stones from the battlements, by which the towers of the enemy were crushed, and the ballista and those who worked them were dashed to the ground, so that many desperately injured and many crushed by the weight of their falling structures. And the elephants were driven back with violence and surrounded by flames which poured forth against them. The moment that they were wounded, retired, and could not be resisted by the riders. So I don't know what the translator here means by flames. Does he mean that the elephants had approached the walls and they poured boiling oil on them? Because it sounds like that the stone throwers, the scorpions, were being used against both elephants and towers. And to be honest, you throw stones of the size that a scorpion could throw, which is the size of a grapefruit or larger. Yeah, it's going to be like a cannonball. That's going to definitely ruin an elephant's day.
Yeah, definitely, and that's, I guess that you could say that this is like a second iteration or an evolution of missile technology used against elephants here. Just a heavier projectile and in greater volume in I guess you could say that are applied in very acute areas to like again to elephants specifically. Yeah, that definitely proved to be successful, but yeah, with the readings that you had provided for me and that what I had found, I've found similar, I guess you could say, translation challenges by by what's being delineated to the reader, whether or not it's like because typically the use of like the use of burning oil or tar, things like that, is in the minds of like the general public. That's almost more associated with the medieval period, but I think that could be applied as well to antiquity. And one other thing I wanted to add just real quickly is that in addition to screaming pigs set on fire or not set on fire, there is there's an alleged use of camels by the use of the conqueror Tamerlane, or sometimes known as Timur, who got a formation of camels together and put like hay and wood on their backs and then lit them on fire and then however it was done, and maybe this happened, maybe it didn't, but that were sent into the primary elephant force of where he was fighting. And I think this was somewhere in, I guess, modern day Uzbekistan, somewhere east of the Caspian Sea. But this is centuries later. This was in the mid 1300s, and so that's probably a bit more of an anomaly and an outlier, because by this point, as far as the Western Mediterranean European powers are concerned, and with the Islamic conquest, elephants have long since disappeared from armies being deployed in the field. But even that, it could be there should be, maybe it's just again an evolutionary instinctual aspect to fire and screaming animals that elephants just cannot handle. But I just wanted to add that to the record.
Yeah, that was the siege of Delhi in 1398. Yeah, that's.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So the question is it the pigs or the fire that made the elephants upset? Because if flaming camels will do it, the common denominator doesn't seem to be pigs; it seems to be fire.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, historically, pigs seem to have a higher score, just because there's more examples of them being used. But it could be, I don't know. That's a tough one for me. I think I'll still lean on the side of pigs, because there must be something, just instinctually, there is something unsettling about the way a pig sounds when it's being slaughtered or it's dying or suffering that's unique to other animals. Not to be too morbid, but yeah, there is something uniquely harrowing about that sound. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know where you land on that.
Yeah, well, it looks like the folklore is wrong, right? It's not a mouse that scares the elephant; it's the pig.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, yeah, it could be. Yeah, again, and I think it's also good to just revisit once again, just even briefly, that elephants are intelligent animals with in comparison to just to other mammals. But I think that they are not they're not trainable in the way that a horse or a dog might be, and or in a way that a human might want to use them. They could be trained in other ways that are unknown to either the historical record or for just pure utilitarian purposes. But as far as warfare is concerned, in the open field with no pigs and as little fire as possible, with experienced riders or drivers, they can do a ton of damage and have decided battles. And they were very effective, especially in the Diadochi Wars. And I think that was probably the apex of their usage as far as warfare is concerned. But once West had sort of met East, it became clear that it didn't take much innovation to think, well, elephants can't, they're too big and too lumbering, as you said earlier, they can't jump. So, you start digging anti-elephant ditches, and then you start setting up caltrops, and then all it takes is just some elaborate missile fire, blaring of trumpets, drums. I've heard that come up. I've read that a few times in the Diadochi Wars. So if there's enough chaotic noise and a variety of missile fire that's focused on a very acute portion of the enemy army's formation, the elephants, then they're just on a clock. You can only use them in really specific scenarios if all the conditions are just right. And we've all, people listening to this, maybe the listeners have maybe played Total War at one point or another, and they're fun as hell to use, and they're fun to use when you've got the Arab riders with the early rifles on top, with like the sort of wooden sort of a castle fixture on top of them. It's like a giant saddle that riflemen can use, but they're like a cool thing to behold historically or in a video game setting or to read about. But really their usage really just runs out once all of these anti-elephant measures were introduced, and they were really introduced in the Diadochi Wars, and Antigonus really felt the pain on that in particular. I don't know what you want to add to that.
Well, we have one last source on anti-elephant tactics, and that's Vegetius, the military institutions of the Romans. And he writes, elephants, by their vast size, horrible noise, and the novelty of their form, are at very first very terrible to both men and horses. Pyrrhus first used them against the Romans in Lucania, and afterwards Hannibal brought them into the field in Africa. Antiochus in the east and Jugurtha in Numidia had great numbers. Many expedients have been used against them. In Lucania, a centurion cut off the trunk of one with his sword. 2 soldiers armed from head to foot in a chariot drawn by 2 horses, also covered with armor against the beast with great lances of great length. They were secured by their armor from the archers of the elephants and avoided the fury of the animals by their swiftness of their horses. Foot soldiers completely armored with the addition of a long spikes fixed on their arms, shoulders, and helmets to prevent the elephants from seizing them with its trunk, were also employed against them. But among the ancients, the velites usually engaged them. They were young soldiers, lightly armed, active, and very expert in throwing their missile weapons on horseback. These troops kept hovering round the elephants continually and killed them with large lances and javelins. Afterwards, the soldiers, as their apprehensions decreased, attacked them in a body and, throwing their javelins together, destroyed them by a multitude of wounds. Slingers with round stones from the fustibalis and sling killed both the men who guided the elephant and the soldiers who fought in the towers on their backs. This was found by experience to be the best and safest expedient. At other times, on the approach of these beasts, the soldiers opened their ranks and let them pass through. When they got into the midst of the troops who surrounded them on all sides, they were captured with their guards unhurt. Large ballistae drawn on carriages by 2 horses or mules should be placed in the rear of the line so that when the elephants come within reach, they may be transfixed with the darts. The ballista should be larger and the heads of the darts stronger and broader than usual, so the darts may be thrown further with greater force and the wounds be proportioned to the bodies of the beasts. It is proper to describe the several methods and contrivances employed against elephants, so that it may be known on occasion in what manner to oppose these prodigious animals. So, as again, the writing of this work by Vegetius, it was assumed he'd still be fighting elephants. And of course, Procopius writes 2 centuries later, writes that the Persians were using elephants against the Byzantines. Now, it's interesting here. We have we've already covered many of these strategies. Ammianus Marcellinus uses ballista. Opening gaps, that would be Scipio. And then to capture them. So I wonder if, presumably Scipio did capture the elephants because 4 years later at Cynocephala, they were used against the Macedonians. And then he also mentions the use of just, velites in general. So Beneventum and, Caesar's in the rearview mirror here too. Now, the one thing that I can't believe we never got in Age of Empires, where the heck is the anti-elephant chariot? I want that as a special unit to counter elephants.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that is one of the coolest, innovations as far as anti-elephant tactics is concerned. I forget the Roman historian. It was maybe it was Polybius Livy, was it Plutarch? Anyways, there was the account of the anti-elephant wagons that were basically drawn by they were moved by cows or some other beast of burden, and there was basically this swinging wooden beam. I'm trying to find an illustration of it real quick to describe it for the audience a bit better, but it was basically just it was designed purely against elephants, where there was long weapons that were either scythes or tridents or any type of blade that could be used against elephants' legs, kind of underneath their armpits, like their ears, their trunks, things like that. Oh, and also I think it should be said that someone in the chat, Caravaggio, said that the riders were absolutely vulnerable, and this was brought up by I think Diodorus Siculus or Plutarch. You'll have to forgive me on the reference there. But riders were often targeted all the time, and if the rider's been shot, by multiple arrows, I don't know, elephants are not going to. They're probably just going to stampede out of there, and just if they're not being controlled by reins or by any other means, they're going to stampede and freak out and leave. So that was also another vulnerability. And lest we forget the Legolas killing of the Oliphant rider in Return of the King, but I'll leave that for the other fellow nerds.
Well, the Roman wagons are from the Battle of Asculum, but they weren't very successful because Pyrrhus defeated them with peltasts.
Right. I just the variety of the weaponry, I think, was what I found interesting, and because they were such long. I mean, they were like scythes that were almost like not quite the length of Macedonian spears and the phalanx, but they were really, really long to keep the elephants at a safe distance while still being able to do damage to their flesh. So I thought that was a pretty cool innovation.
Yeah. The other thing is, why didn't any video game come up with a spiked soldier covered in spiked armor who's anti-elephant? What does he do? AoE damage to elephants by walking up to them?
Yeah. Well, there was. It was either was it Pyrrhus or was it it was either Antigonus's forces in the Second Diadochi Wars. There were spiked soldiers, and they'd have spiked shields that they could lay down as sort of improvised caltrops, which I thought was really cool. And it just looks something like out of a heavy metal cartoon. Just cool, just very cool looking, and also really effective. And the helmets were even spiked too. I forget the reason for that. I know it had a utilitarian use. It wasn't just to look like a creature from Mordor. It was the helmets being spiked had a specific use, but I forget which use that was. But the shields being spiked were used as, or allegedly used as, improvised caltrops, and I think that's really genius for the time, at least.
So summing everything up we've learned, if you're going up against elephants, dig a trench, put caltrops in front of the trench, put catapults behind the trench, triple checkmate. Like, you're done. It's over.
Yeah, and if you have a few pigs too, you're good to go. Yeah,
they're in reserve. They're held in reserve.
They're very reliable reserves. Yeah, and yeah, that's not to completely trash them. I mean, they're beautiful animals. They're almost mystical in the way that they look, and they're very gentle and blah 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 and all this happy stuff. But yes, I mean, I agree with all that. But as far as fielding them in battle, they're just, unfortunately for all of the belligerence of the wars of antiquity, they were just simply too unruly. They were too logistically challenging. And before the stream started, I had asked you the question, are you aware of any examples of elephants being placed on ships and moved across bodies of water? And you brought up Pyrrhus and moving elephants to Sicily, I believe. And
who went to Italy to fight the Romans.
Right. And that, I mean, while elephants are responsible for a lot of Pyrrhus's victories, I think they're also responsible for a lot of logistical strain that was, although probably very little of that was documented. It was probably, it just strains logistics so much, and just putting elephants on ships back then. And this is centuries before the age of sail, when ships could actually survive storms, and I mean, it's just there's too many things going against you to field them effectively, but they are cool as heck to use in video games. I will say that.
Well, the other one that must have done it by sea is Hannibal, because elephants are not native to Spain.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And yeah, they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, and made this insane march all the way from modern day Morocco all the way down into the all the way down into Italy. So yeah, you can only imagine how horrible it would be to just put these things on ships and to keep them calm and then feeding. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
For example, this isn't the same as crossing the sea, but this is probably an expedient that would have been used when Hannibal was trying to cross the Rhone River in the very early days of his end run or Hail Mary around the Alps into Rome. He basically built rafts and then put sod on the rafts to make the elephants think that they were still on land.
Oh, wow.
And that's how they got calm enough to cross the River Rhone.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that, but that all makes sense in retrospect. Yeah, I think to flip the script a little bit. I think again, just to restate it for the audience and for ourselves, the best use of elephants is just in open ground. No, not to forcibly put them in an urban setting, and I guess ensure that your battlefield intelligence is to the point where you can make good judgments about the missile firing capabilities of your enemy. And if it's minimal or moderate at best, and if the if the close combat, the spear and sword units are in, if they have poor discipline, or if they lack the sort of Macedonian discipline or Roman discipline, then I think you're good to use them. But it didn't take long for a lot of these, the generals of the Diadochi Wars to, take notes from each other and apply these very quickly. And then you end up with things like, anti-elephant wagons and spiked armor, spiked shields, the mass, like these armies making sort of improvised caltrops, and you can obscure them too. You can dig a trench, put caltrops in them, and then put grass over them, almost similar to like a bamboo trap in Vietnam or something like that. That is a similar, a similar usage, I guess you could say. But other than that, yeah, these anti-elephant tactics they were implemented fairly quickly, and unfortunately for the elephants, as far as warfare goes, they just weren't around that long compared to, I guess you could say, the horse, which has just been used forever.
Well, there's another thing too that while we're at this, that's really been frustrating. If you read the tertiary sources on the Second Punic War, they'll always say that Hannibal lost most of his elephants crossing the Alps. He used them a little bit at Trebia, and then he had one left across the Arno swamp. But living records, so Marcellus, who's the capturer of Syracuse, dies fighting Hannibal. But in one of the battles against Hannibal, this is what Livy reports. The enemy that day had more than 5,000 killed, 600 captured, with 19 standards and 2 elephants. 4 elephants having been killed in the action. So Hannibal must have been resupplied with elephants between crossing the Alps. And I think Marcellus dies like in 211. So why does nobody talk about this?
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point, and this gets into the broader issue of how heavily one relies upon primary sources versus these secondary, tertiary sources of that came along centuries later. We discussed briefly before the stream about oh my gosh, the British historian, help me. JFC Fuller, sorry. Yeah, JFC Fuller. And JFC Fuller was, he was critiquing a lot of Arrian's accounts of Alexander's first encounter with the elephants and things like that. And he said that Arrian was far too generous towards Alexander's casualties. And, that could be true. It could not be true. But by this point, it's hard to say, or maybe, well, I don't know. It'd be interesting to speculate on what JFC Fuller's motivations were for doing that. The Italians and the British have had, an interesting relationship all throughout the Middle Ages and through the World Wars and so on and so forth. So who knows? I mean, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here, but and maybe he's a bad example to bring up with regards to the problem of tertiary sources in subjects of antiquity. But yeah, I tend to lean on primary sources first, and then depending on how good translations are and what new archaeological discoveries have been found, you could sort of make a Hegelian synthesis between the two, so long as there's, I guess you could say, an adherence to these primary documents, because it's all that we have left. And everybody can bellyache all day about, like, these figures were exaggerated, that was exaggerated, and that's probably true in most cases. But at the same time, there was no one else there. Like, what are you going to do? And I was also going to say too, in the Battle of Gaza, when Ptolemy, I forget who Ptolemy was fighting in Gaza, but they did use caltraps to trap and capture elephants. The elephants were sent out, as far as the records go, that the elephants had charged out in the open ground well ahead of the defending forces, and they got caught up in these caltraps and sort of like they're sort of frozen, like they didn't want to step anymore because it was just too damn painful. And so that was a way, there's enough distance between Ptolemy's forces and the forces in Gaza to at least capture elephants and take them to the rear, to have the spikes taken out of them, calm them down, whatever, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think in many cases these elephants wouldn't have been killed if they could have been neutralized, because, like with Scipio at Zama, when they go through the lines, and as Vegetius says, it was the practice to capture them. But I think, just to sum up everything, again, elephants in the West were last recorded used at Thapsus in 46 BC. They could, of course, be transported by sea. At least twice, Hannibal had to get his elephants to Spain, and then he got reinforcements to fight Marcellus in either first or second Herdonia. So, but with the extinction in the 3rd or 4th centuries AD, the native supply was gone. And Carthage used elephants pretty much throughout its history once they were domesticated. And then the Persians continued to use them right up until the Islamic conquest. One of the famous battles, I think, is even called the Battle of the Elephant, where a Saracen hero single-handedly kills an elephant. And of course, Procopius and Vegetius write about their use. Now, whether Greeks and Romans and later Byzantines don't use elephants is self-evident. They lost supply. Why the Islamic caliphates didn't, I don't know. Islamic forces would use elephants, as we saw with Sultanate of Delhi. So it's not so much that an Islamic army wouldn't use elephants. The question, and I just don't know. It could also be that the Indians it's kind of like Greek fire, right? Do you want to give a potential enemy your secret weapon?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I remember, we were speculating on that before the stream as to why, the Umayyads, I think I'm butchering the pronunciation, but the Umayyad Caliphate was, one of the dominant caliphates of the Islamic conquests. Just geographically, it goes without saying that they're much closer to India than the Mediterranean states, and so why the use of these animals was not used so much, I don't know. They may have preferred the speed of just equestrian based forces, because a lot of these sweeping moves that were made in the initial Islamic conquest went into Cairo, into Alexandria, and then all the way past Tripoli and up all the way into Antioch. And this was in the course of something like 2 years, and or even less, at least those initial big pincer moves. Why those forces weren't accompanied by elephant cavalry or elephant forces, that the Islamic conquerors may have preferred speed over just heavily these slow moving units. And there's accounts too of armored elephants as well. I think that the resources for any state or power or general, whatever the context or war is concerned, it's a heck of a lot of work to armor an elephant. You'd probably rather use all of that metal for heavy infantry, or just devote all of that precious material to your foot-based ground forces. I think the reasons why the Islamic caliphates never used them, that to me is also a mystery. I think it probably just came down to availability, logistics, and sort of the zeal of conquest and the desire to strike fast rather than go about a prolonged campaign that would have been slowed down by things like elephants and other things like that.
Now, to put this into perspective, for the use of elephants in war outside of the main breeding ground is India. And of course, throughout right up until the British imperial expansion in the 18th and 19th centuries, in both India and Burma, elephants were being used. So I think in part it's the availability issue that negated the use of the West, and possibly even the Islamic forces. Because as I said, one could easily envision the Indians are like, well, wait, we gave elephants to the Greeks, and they could use them against us. Maybe we're not going to do it. And to the Persians, maybe we're not going to do it again. And you got to remember too, the Persians and the Indians, whether it's Achaemenid Persians or Sassanian Persians, they're not really that different. They're the same kind of people. Whereas and the religion of Zoroastrianism doesn't generate the same. And it's not militantly expansionist. So the Hindus really hate Muslims. They still do today. So it's like they see them as an existential threat. And it's quite likely, I'm only speculating here, that unlike with the Persians or the Greeks, they're like, we're not giving you these.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, they may have just made it could just come down to that they wanted to maintain the monopoly of elephants. And by the time Alexander had arrived with his army to northern India, I mean, this is where the mutiny took place. And it's like, look, we've been further away from Macedonia than anyone else we've ever known of, or has probably ever existed. And they were just, for all intents and purposes, they were just pissed at this point, and they wanted to go home. And with that contention in the air, and then now you're forced to fight these creatures you've never seen before that look like something out, just like some bestiary. It's like that. It's almost as like they're just visually colossal and scary to fight, and that goes without saying. But I think combined with like this, the will to fight, I mean, I'm just speaking specifically of Alexander's forces here. And then Alexander dies, of course, and then the Diadochi Wars break out, and at this point, elephants have had more encounters with the Alexander's generals, and so these innovations took place then. But with reference to that original Alexander's original campaign, I would, you're worn out and you have to fight these beasts that are just you've never seen before. It would be that if that's not a deterrent, then I really don't know what.
Well, it's like Here Be Dragons.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
well, so to make a minor correction, I said there were two mutinies that Alexander had. Opis was the second one near Baghdad. The first mutiny, the one that stopped his invasion, was the Hydaspes mutiny right after Hydaspes.
Right.
And I think this is where I would argue Fuller's just wrong, because all the Greek historians agree on this topic that speak about it. The mutiny occurred because of the elephants. Plutarch mentions this, Arrian mentions this, and Megisthenes mentions it. They weren't going to fight more elephants because Pyrrhus had only maybe like not even 100, but there was an empire at the time called the Nanda Empire, which boasted of 10,000 elephants, and they're just like, no. So clearly the elephants really mussed up the Macedonians, and they weren't going to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, because I guess I hadn't, I guess I hadn't put all those points together with these various historians making that. But yeah, I had read that elephants had come up so much being associated with one of the main sources of the mutiny, and sorry, I should say the second mutiny, and I mean, it just makes sense.
The first mutiny. That was my mistake.
Sorry about that. No, you're good. But yeah, I think it's just more of like what you would say is just like defensive insurance, or it's a deterrent. It's like why would you want to march an army all the way from the eastern Mediterranean all the way into northern India only to fight these creatures that are out of the Tolkien universe? I mean, it's no wonder there was problems in the army. But yeah, I think they're probably best used to be fair to the Indian usage of elephants in warfare, they're probably best used in sort of a proto-defensive posture, where if you've got an army that's trying to besiege one of your cities, but you've still got a standing army outside of your own settlement that you're defending, if you can flex how many elephants you have, it just visually, it's so imposing. And so maybe elephants made a better psychological weapon than they did an actual practical weapon of war. And so there's some overlapping there that's complicated, where they were effective in trampling and breaking up formations, whereas it's just scary as hell to have to fight these animals. And then also you've got the towers that were mounted on top of them, with guys with javelins and arrow troops, archers and things like that, and slingers. It's so, I don't know. I think I almost tend to lean on the side that they are a better psychological weapon than they were something that should be effectively used on a battlefield, because they're just too unreliable. If you're betting all the chips that the elephants are going to be the deciding factor in a battle, I don't know. That's you're taking a lot of risks. And I think there's plenty of historical evidence to back that up.
Well, I'm just going to end with this. The Timor Total War Special Unit is Flaming Camels, super effective against elephants.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, fair point.
So can we count that as your final statement then?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it.
All right, everybody, this is Todd Lewis. Oh, well, thank you again for coming on Terminal Philosophy. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it has been. Yeah, thanks for having me on again, man.
All right, this is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fly podcast, signing off.